a forum we initiated to help fill in the gap in scholarship and advocacy focused on Dalit issues, especially by honoring Dalit perspectives. Clearly, we are gaining momentum and look forward to strengthening our contribution to these efforts. In the spirit of inclusion, which is one of our fundamental issues, I would like you all to nominate qualified speakers for future installments in this dialogue. So far, the dialogue has been graced by stirring presentations by Professor Sukadeo Thorat and Professor N.D. Varghese. Our next speaker is scheduled to be delivered by Professor Barbara Harris White. She's Professor Emeritus of Queen Elizabeth House at Oxford University. Please stay tuned for specifics on the date and time of her talk. So the dialogue is an outgrowth of the Journal of Dalit Studies, which is still in its incubation phase. It was launched with the explicit intent to pursue the Dalit agenda and the study of it from experts with deep knowledge and experience with the lived experiences and circumstances of Dalit people and other marginalized communities. Core ideals of this effort also extend to elevating the marginalized voices and to offering them a platform. We invite new voices from Dalit and other marginalized communities to make offerings to the journal. The journal and its activities are coordinated by the very same group that organizes these talks. In the same spirit as the global dialogue, we invite contributions from scholars and activists deeply engaged with Dalit issues. Both the global dialogue and the journal are supported by Dignity Initiative based in Kathmandu and the Center for Development Studies, Shimla, both organizations inspired by the need to elevate Dalit issues and to foster dignity and inclusion for Dalits and other marginalized people. Under their nurturing light, let me thank Rup Sunar, J.B. Biswakarma, and Dr. Prasant Negi for their diligence and their incredible efforts, which really make these talks possible. I would now like to introduce our esteemed speaker, Professor Kancha Ilaiah Shepherd. Professor Kancha Ilaiah Shepherd is a well-known, eminent scholar who writes prolifically on Shudra and Dalit issues. Among the important posts he has held, he was most recently director for the Center of Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusion Policy at Maulana Azad National Urdu University in Hyderabad. He has authored many influential papers and books, the most recent of which is The Sudras, A Vision for New Path. This groundbreaking work was eagerly received by his audience, so eagerly that it became a bestseller in just 3 days. As we have come to anticipate from him, Professor Kancha Ilaiah Shepherd will speak on a timely and urgent topic. The title of his talk is Farmers' Fight Against Farm Laws, the Greatest Rebellion of the Shudras Against the Brahman-Bania Hegemony in Indian History. Please join with me in welcoming the esteemed Professor Kancha Ilaiah Shepherd to our virtual podium. Professor, please.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that gracious introduction. And also I thank the group of Global Dialogue on behalf of the Journal of Dalit Studies, which is organizing these very important talks for global academics and scholars, students and teachers to engage with and discuss, debate, and write about. Now, when Mr. Prashant asked me what would I speak about for this global audience, I thought I should speak about the most powerful farmers' struggle that India and the world witnessed from this land at a time when the right wing BJP Hindutva government is ruling with a kind of authoritarianism that it commands because of the majority that it has in parliament for the second time. And Narendra Modi, his home minister, and the RSS, headed by Mohan Bhagwat, and then the other leaders, this key leadership comes from the Brahman-Bania background. Though Modi has an OBC certificate, but he does not come from the Shudra agrarian OBC background. He himself comes from one of the Bania communities from Gujarat, who have been historically, of course, not very rich, but they have been in business. So in North India, quite a lot of Bania communities have taken OBC certificates and joined the ranks of Shudra OBCs for reservation. So Modi is one among such people. Now, why I call this farmers' struggle, not just agitation, the greatest farmer struggles in Indian history. Number one, because of the spontaneity that it has and the massively well-organized, non-political form of the struggle, and the agenda that it carried was to see that the monopoly capital of India and global cannot be allowed to take over Indian agriculture and the whole market system, which was meant to destroy the autonomy of the agrarian sector to start with, and also the provinces that actually control the agricultural economic production and distribution and other related things, because agriculture is essentially in what we call in Indian constitution is the state subject, not the central subject, except for river water distribution and then welfare grain distribution through accumulation of market grains. But that the sale system was within the state governments, and in the regional markets where the farmers would have certain control over what they call mandis. And of course, there are Bania millers and other mill owners who also buy grain and millets and so on and so forth. So for the first time, the BJP has passed these laws which does not relate to the Muslim minority question. Earlier, most of their agendas were Muslim minority related agendas, whether it was building of Ram temple or it was CAA, where the citizenship rights of the migrants from Bangladesh and Pakistan, essentially Muslims were involved. And then the question of Kashmir was another their major issue, where they took away the constitutional autonomy that Kashmir was given in 1950 through Article 370. Apart from that, they also went on Muslim issues like the divorce laws, the marriage laws, what is known as basically triple talaq and so on. So it was that which actually kept the Shudra, Dalit, and other upper castes. See, in my talk, I would use a concept like Shudra, in which 52% of all agrarian communities, including the top, what we call kulaks, or rich farmers or landed gentry in the present context, and coming from the Shudra upper layer who were not part of the reservation in the OBC category, and also entire OBCs, Dalits, and tribals, what we call Adivasis in Indian context. They all are part of the agrarian economy. And when I use the Brahman-Bania hegemonic forces, apart from Brahmins and Banias who own almost 95% of Indian monopoly capital, Banias own 46% of the capital, Brahmins own 42% of the capital, whether it is hardware capital or software capital, only these two communities own. The agrarian, historically productive communities, what I call the Shudras, have only about 3.8% share in that. Dalits have only 2.8 something. The remaining few Muslims have some, capital ownership and here and there small Christian networks, but otherwise, so that Brahman-Bania control is also includes the kayasthas, who are largely classical landed Brahminic communities, and Khatris who were in the Western India, and Kshatriyas. Yogi Adityanath himself comes from that caste background, which is historically the ruler caste. So these 5 communities, which hardly constitute about 5 to 6% of Indian population, control today the major capital, 95% or so, and central government complete economy, and the power structures, including banking sector and stock markets, the whole of Indian economy is in their hands. So whom I called in the Shudra's book, the Dvijas, who have the classical Janevu across their body. So So the primary contradiction in Indian economy has been for a long time between the Dvijas on the one hand, the Shudra, Dalit, Adivasis on the other. And there is another contradiction between the Shudras and also other Dvijas vis-a-vis the Dalit on the question of untouchability. Human untouchability gets separated between Dalits and the other communities. Of course, the Adivasis or the tribes are outside the pale of this relationship. Now, if you look at the written Indian history by whatever could be the school that wrote this history, whether it was right-wing Hindu historians or the nationalist historians or the left liberal historians, unfortunately, most of them came from the Dvija background, and they did not recognize the question of caste historically in the agrarian evolution. So ever since around 1500 BCE or so, the main Brahmanic text was written, namely Rig Veda, where they divided the then Indian population into 4 categories. The Shudras as the 4th Varna, which was more or less equivalent to the slaves in Israel, Greek, Mesopotamian, and European context. But they were called Shudras as a Varna. And then above them there was the Vaishya community, and then Kshatriyas. On the top of it were the Brahmins. Now the Shudras were assigned the animal grazing, animal economy, meat and milk, and the earlier agriculture which India had was by and large destroyed after the Aryan migration in the wars between the Harappan Indians and the newly migrant Aryans. Because India had an agricultural advanced system much better than the Mesopotamian or early Israelite or Egyptian Greek agriculture. That's how they built animal economy. We had buffalo, we had bull and cow, we had sheep and goat enormously. And then they built villages first, and then after they built cities. So the city civilization before Aryans came was basically built around the agrarian surplus. And that was destroyed by the newly migrated Aryan community. And then they enslaved the native people, and they were designated as the Shudras. Now, agriculture for a long time during Vedic period was stagnated because the economy was pushed back into what they call pastoral economy. That means basically the Brahmins were indulging in rituals and yajnas, yagas, and then sacrifice of animals. The Kshatriyas were serving them as the militant protectors of their designs. The Vaishyas were in the periphery of agriculture, and there was hardly much business in it. So the Shudras were made to expand the animal economy by force, by deploying the whole labor, and there was no category called untouchables there. Now, we don't come across, even in their texts, the category of untouchables quite significantly till the Buddhist texts show their existence. So otherwise, the Hindu so-called sacred literature, which Max Weber and Max Muller and others also accepted, only tells very occasional stories about the Shudras. And in all their texts, which BJP wants them to impose as ancient Indian knowledge texts on schools, colleges, universities, Vedas, Upanishads, Ramayana, Mahabharata, basically deal with the Brahmin rishis, their ritual practices, and Kshatriya kings, who later on were projected as gods, including King Sri Rama himself. Now, we don't see what kind of agricultural work that the Shudras were doing and how they were improving the economy in those kingdoms, even in the historical kingdoms like Magadha and so on, or earlier Janapada kingdoms. So there is no knowledge in the text about the Shudra productivity agrarian economy. But my mapping up of the village agrarian production, as I see now in my lifetime, first on the Harappan civilization and then on the later Shudra agrarian economy. So we had tilling, we had wood cutting, we had brick making much before the Aryans came here. And we had bronze tools, therefore canal making, urban cities construction, some sort of a class formation there. But later on, we hardly come to know what agrarian economy the Shudras were performing, how the wealth was being generated, food was being produced. Now, only evidence comes when I did my PhD on Gautam Buddha's political thought, started reading the suttas, pitakas, their tilling appears, their harvesting appears, their cattle appear, and the business class significantly appears, apart from the Kshatriya rulers and the Brahmin rishis. So thereafter, after Gautam Buddha's period and the Buddhist India, and then the tribal kingdoms getting destroyed and imperial states being formed, we never knew what agrarian struggles were taking place as against the Dvija, vandalism, looting, their sacrifices, their food wastage, because they used to kill hundreds of cattle. All of them were beef eaters, all of them are meat eaters, because basically meat was the staple food, though rice was being produced and barley was being produced. Later, wheat was introduced to Indian agriculture. Now, if I look at the parallel history of China, there were series of farmers' rebellions against the monarchs for their right to own the land, the right to protect the crop, and on the price system. In fact, some of the Chinese historians described them around first, second, and third century rebellions as Chinese civil wars. Because the agrarian mass and the artisanal community, India has massive artisanal economy in the Harappan period, pre-Brahminic period, and post-Brahminic, post-Vedic period also. Our economic structure was both land-related and artisan. Now, at what stage the leather economy was completely separated from Shudra artisanal economy, and untouchable principle was introduced between leather industry and other artisanal industries is not known now. But my hunch is the untouchability principle between the Dalits and the Shudras was based on the idea of Brahminic declaration of leather untouchability and beef untouchability in subsequent years. Now, some of people are asking, where is your evidence? Because the evidence I can't get even in Romila Thapar or D.D. Kosambi or any other historian who wrote on ancient India, because they have not dealt about the Shudra economy separately in detail. There is no such this thing. So what I tried to look at was why the Brahmins of India did not write their books on leather scrolls when the Greeks, the Israelites, and the Chinese wrote their books on leather scrolls. Whereas the Brahmins, the historians listening my talk can also see this, the Brahmins wrote only on thalapatras, the palm leaves. Now, this is a very, very ancient, unscientific way of writing books, because writing on leather scrolls certainly sustained the script for longer and the preservation was better. For example, recently in Israel, Prophet Isaiah's leather scrolls were discovered in long pots, and they were hidden in the mountain holes. So from Kautilya onwards, the writing seems to have come into existence, 3rd century BC. And all of them wrote on small talapatras, and they never could be preserved properly. Now that means the Brahmins by then declared leather as untouchable. Now leather was a very important instrument of agrarian development. That was the basic, and it was essentially a Dalit industry, even now. And it could be in ancient times a specialized group of Shudras who were doing leather specialization, converting skin into leather, leather into commodities, bags, ropes, belts and shoes, chappal, and so on. So, because of caste, because of the Brahminic imposition, the Shudras could not read and write. They could not write their food production processes about. And the Dalits who were already declared untouchables in post-Buddhist period, as Ambedkar rightly says, who were made a categorical social group, who constitute now 16.6, whom the Shudras also treat as untouchable. They could not rebel because there was no way to organize them into one unit. So at no point of time in history, whether it is of pre-Muslim kingship periods or post-Muslim period, or even of the British period, the Shudras and the Dalits had no right to educate themselves in any pan-Indian language. Therefore, a rebellion could not take place for their rights. So unless the peasantry revolts, systems won't change, because the very production of any nation historically was located in agrarian production. We see that in Germany, we see that in Britain, we see that even by 12th Magna Carta and so on, and French Revolution, and so many, the British War of Bloodless Revolution, all that was done by farmers. Because there was an education to them, there was a right to organize with an all-national connectivity. So what Brahmins and the other wings of Dvijas did is that language tool was not given to them. Take, for example, they were not supposed to learn Sanskrit, they were not supposed to write, read, and they were living unscripted languages as the poor tribes live now in many parts. So therefore, what is happening in Punjab, nobody knows in South. What is happening in Gujarat, nobody knows in Bengal. And Sanskrit was never allowed. Unfortunately, the Muslim rulership, Persian was also never allowed for them to learn. Persian was a ruling language for about 1,000 years, unfortunately, or 800 years. Then English came in. Even that was never allowed, even in the, though the right to learn English was opened up by the British, by the colonials. So it was Mahatma Phule who first learned English, and he was the first school-going Shudra, leave alone Dalit. So given that, even in the freedom movement, the struggles that, farmer struggles that are popularly known as the Champaran struggle and the Gadchiroli struggle of Gujarat, where Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who himself was a Shudra, young lawyer, organized the peasantry. Two important struggles he led. This is where Gandhi learned about peasant struggles. And they organized few peasant struggles. And the tribals organized struggles of their own. But not a single struggle in any known written history was as massive as the 2020 farmer struggle. Now, as massive as qualitatively, as massive as vision-wise, as massive as propaganda-wise. Now, this fight is not against a very weak central government. A very strong Hindu or Brahmanic fundamentalist, I don't want to use Hindu more, the Brahmanic Dvija fundamentalist, hegemonic, Brahman-Bania controlled, and mostly English educated, and largely Hindi region hegemonic. Now the struggle came up, number one, in Hindi Punjabi regions. And its strength actually did not lie in Hindi language, but its strength actually lies in the younger generation who learned English and quickly understood what these formulas are. And the critical role was played by the Punjabi Jat Sikh youth. Now, this is a very important thing. Not many have realized the role of English, the role of social media, and the role of ability of the Punjabis to internationalize their struggle and create a crisis to the national and international Dvijas who were in the Hindutva fold. Otherwise, they would not have withdrawn. It is not just Narendra Modi's withdrawal. It is bending of the back of entire Hindutva, Brahman-Bania caste, Khatri, English educated, right-wing American Hindu Foundation and British. They are located in various ways and writing all across the country. And they were shocked for the first time that this can lead to a civil war as a Shudra versus Dvija. That's a very critical issue. Now, when the Punjab youth, a Akali Dal minister, a lady who is an excellent English speaker, the moment the laws were passed, she resigned, because even before taking any clue from her party, which was part of the Narendra Modi cabinet, she immediately declared, I am resigning and fighting these laws, because she is a very well English educated woman, daughter-in-law of the chief minister. And then within hours, the Punjabi youth who are across the world understood that this is to destroy their agrarian labor economics. Now, once they organized for several days within the Punjab and small ways in Haryana and small ways in UP, the mainstream media, whether of the communal variety or the secular variety, controlled by the Brahman-Bania Kayastha Khatri networks, did not even show this as an important agitation coming forth. Then they realized, unless we seize Delhi borders, this media and the ruling forces do not realize our strength. And quite interestingly, Punjab, the Jat Sikhs, the ideology that they drew from Guru Nanak, I wrote an article on print. You can see that how Guru Nanak defeated Guru Hedgeva in this battle of morality and immorality, of peace and non-violence, peace, non-violence, and violence of the RSS, BJP, and the state that they are. So the 10 gurus of Sikhism were not so non-violent actually. They propagated militant fight whenever it is necessary. But this time they realized that they will have to use their mass strength in a very non-violent way, and a very well-organized Gurudwara, food and their dignity of labor issues, labor culture, and they brought whole thing to Delhi borders. And as a result, the Haryana Jats, who were also about to lose their production, because the Haryana chief minister is a Khatri, who also do all sorts of businesses and control major economy. And then the Uttar Pradesh chief minister is a Kshatriya, who is against the farmers. And so once this started happening, the non-Sikh farmers of Uttar Pradesh, headed by Tikayat, his father was a great farmer movement during Charan Singh time itself, and they mobilized the UP farmers. It is not just one caste. The whole artisanal economy, the whole Dalit labor, and they organized panchayats across UP, Bihar, Punjab. Thousands, lakhs of people came there, and they took an oath that we will fight this cutting across caste and religion. And the women's mobilization, women's mobility on their own. And don't forget, Punjabi women are well educated in English now. I was listening their English speaking capacities. Unless there is English, they cannot intimidate the Indian English media gangs, which are English educated, and they don't give a single job to Jat, Gujar, Patel, anybody. All the TV channels, newspapers are controlled by Dvijas. And they criticize Modi and all that, but they are very soft on RSS. The more focus on Modi, because even the secular, liberal, communist media people are after Modi, as if he is one individual, came from heaven like that, and if they fight, he will go to heaven like that or hell like that. But he is part of the larger RSS. RSS is headed by mainly Brahmins, Mohan Bhagwat and Dattatreya Hosbole and Ram Madhav and so on. Their theory comes from them. Their intellectuality comes from Brahmins. Their money comes from Banias. So the Punjabis understood this first. The Haryana Sudras understood this. So it is virtually a Shudra top layer organizing along with the lower OBC Shudras, artisans, Dalit labor, and the tribals behind to support it in several ways. Of course, few of us were writing, we have very small space. And at the same time, the Shudra's vision for a new path, this book has come out. This book has come out. I want all of you to see this. So this book has played a key role in telling the people RSS Hindu Rashtra, if it comes, it is not the Muslims who are going to be affected most. Muslims will suffer, but Muslims are an international community. Their issue could be globalized, their support base, even the secular intellectuals support them a lot. But the Shudra Dalit issues, we don't have an international platform. We don't have intellectuals to write for us, support us, deal with it. So we formulated in this book that if the Hindu Rashtra, by dismantling the constitution or mutilating it in various ways, gets established, the most sufferers would be the Shudra agrarian masses, in which reserved and unreserved, and Dalits will be anyway there. They are already facing it. Adivasis are already facing the brunt of taking over their resources and so on by the monopoly capital. So the Shudra youth were studying this book because for the first time we found a young generation who could understand English, and they started spreading the social media, this thing that it is not the Modi problem. Modi alone is not the problem. The whole Dvija cultural history is a problem. Though, you know, this Congress, Chidambaram, Jairam Ramesh, Shashi Tharoor kind of people are saying Hinduism is different from Hindutva. We are all Hindus. But where are the Shudras in that? Even in Congress, there are no Shudras. Even in BJP, RSS was started basically by Brahmins. At least Congress was not started by Brahmins. Congress was started by a Scottish Evo Hume and two Parsis, Dadabhai Naoroji and one more person. So later on, Brahmin joined and Bania joined. But RSS was started by Brahmins and supported by Banias, and now supported by Brahman-Bania caste Khatris and Kshatriyas fully, because they think that it is theirs. And if Ram temple is built, it is a temple of a Kshatriya god with which they can control the entire wealth through even spiritual means. So this now youth are understanding. So this rebellion has a deeper historical meaning. Number one, it lasted for 1 year. People were feeding themselves in the cold, and in this kind of corona crisis, 750 people died, not with corona, but with various factors of attack by police, lathi charges, and cold, and some of them cold come, corona come. So government was not carrying any death, the farmers did. Now state governments are coming forward after they won the battle. We will give you, Telangana government said we will give you 3 lakhs each. So others are saying this and that, center is silent. But they were very poor farmers. Remember, even though people were dying there and they were keeping those dead bodies in midst of the mass sittings. And they were feeding the police who beat them in the Gurudwaras. Now, this kind of new, what in the Gandhian language was called satyagraha, but those satyagrahas hardly any deaths. So this government proved to be worse than British in killing the farmers, 750. The Britishers accept Jallianwala Street Fire, and farmers were beaten when they were sitting on dharnas, and medical teams were allowed there. But here, there is no record of, in one major agitation, 750 people were killed in any struggle of India in one stretch. So it's a massive, and there is no political party support. They refuse to take party support. It is a mass agrarian consciousness. Now, for me, this consciousness is important. Because when I was looking at the history of agriculture, Indian Brahmanism killed a very big philosophical stream called agriculturalism, which was about to form during the Buddhist period. They were trying to till and they were trying to theorize that what is tilling in philosophical terms, making 2 out of 1 or 3, 10, 20, 30, what does it mean? What does the forest and the land relationship mean? What does seed and soil relate? They were formulating agrarian philosophy, which the Chinese called agriculturalism in 7th century BC. So our farmers, our Shudras, were not allowed to become philosophers and write their books. There is an essay which I wrote in Countercurrents, you can see on Google, called Agriculturalism, Hindutva and Agriculturalism. This philosophy was not allowed to emerge. Only Vedic, only Upanishadic, only Ramayanic, only epic stories. These are all superstitious stories. They have nothing to do with production. They were all war-related stories and basically confining to Brahmins and Kshatriyas. Here and there, the Shudra, Vaishya, or Chandala names figure in a negative sense. So therefore, in quality terms, this farmer's struggle after the Misra family, who was a minister, a Brahmin from UP itself, Uttar Pradesh, whose son drove over the Shudra farmers, it was about to turn into a civil war and a caste war. And quickly, the BJP, RSS, they realized that they tried to negotiate and do something. So it has all the potential of giving a new direction to India. What is this new direction? Number one, the Shudra intellectuals, along with Dalit intellectuals and tribals, are likely to emerge to produce a counter-Hindutva philosophy and ideology around the idea of production by the Shudras and anti-production of the Brahmanic forces, historically. They were never with the production. Production was declared as pollution. So leather economy was polluted, tilling pollution. Brahmins never do tilling. Kshatriyas never do tilling, even now. So they live around, and the British did not understand. They thought that these books were great cultural history and so on. They were in Sanskrit or the German scholars. But now with the Shudra scholars will reconstruct the philosophy of production and its conflicting zones with the Hindutva history and philosophy, whether they're Ramayana, Mahabharata, Vedas, and so on. So what do they teach tomorrow will be an issue. And the farmer struggle is going to be a major issue in the colleges and universities. And a lot of things will have to be written about it by organic intellectuals. We don't want to depend on Brahman-Bania, sympathetic, liberal, left. They have never written anything about Shudras and Dalits. Till we wrote something. Till Pule came and wrote something about Shudra and Ati-Shudra Dalit, they did not talk anything. He was the first intellectual who actually combined Shudra-Dalit problem. Then Ambedkar came, then Periyar came. So we fought, and then it is Sharath Yadav, it is Mulayam Singh, Lalu Prasad, these people fought for, and VP Singh had to implement Mandal. So it is the organic intellectuals who educated in modern English in whatever weakest way that we could, because we did not get Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard English education, nor we can afford. But the Punjabis, having spread over through labor means in Canada, in Australia, in England, in America, are going to throw a challenge to Hindutva forces in all other countries. And I want the Shudra OBC intellectuals to join them and produce intellectuals who write the history of production, not based on books, but based on the real life of the farming Shudras, Dalits, Adivasis. So this battle is the biggest in history, longest sustained, and well balanced, intellectually very well choreographed, and the cultural movements moved in, and the Punjabi cultural movements have shaken up. And they have now defeated the Hindutva in the formulas issue, and the other demands are put, but the moral defeat of Hindutva in the hands of the Shudra agrarian forces is a significant development in the whole history of India. This is my understanding. We need to write more. We need to research more. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a stimulating talk, Professor. I certainly found many, many interesting points that I think will enrich my understanding of not only the current farmers movement in India, but how it connects to deeper historical and cultural issues related to caste and the distribution of knowledge within the caste system. Much more complex than that, but this is not my forum, this is yours. So please, everybody, join me in thanking Dr. Shepherd for such a wonderful speech. And now we'll move on to the question and answer portion, and we will we'll get through as many of these as we can, but we will end on time so that people can move on to their next agenda on their for themselves today. So the first question is it possible, do you think, to abolish caste discrimination through class struggle based on communist theory?
No, the communist theory attempted class struggle such a long period of 90 years, because the Communist Party of India is as old as RSS. But communism and their brand of socialism is nowhere now. That is because I myself was part of a left-wing group, and we realized that casteism is so deep there, and they have never studied India creatively. So abolition of caste by the class struggles has failed, because unless castes are annihilated with an understanding of production relations, spiritual systemic inequalities, because as I was saying, the first declaration by Rig Veda was a spiritual declaration. That the Hindu, the Brahman god, who himself is a Brahman called Brahma, created from his own body the Shudras as the last slave community. And they have separated, unlike any other religion, production from religion. So this destroyed Indian development from that day onwards. Because if you compare that with, there is an essay of mine, the God clashing visions of Jews and Brahmins. The Jewish vision God first as a worker for 6 days, and 7th day he took rest. And then he created universal Adam and Eve in universal Godhead. Then their children were producers. Cain and Abel, one was a shepherd, one was an agriculture. So in Brahmanic history, there is no God who works at all. Production is treated as anti-God. So this the communists never understood. So first we need to abolish caste through caste struggles itself. But certainly we need to look at religion, we need to look at, because spiritually, take for example, leather was used as a marker of creation of untouchability between Dalits and Shudras. So it was spiritual declaration, but nowhere leather is spiritually untouchable. In his Greek history, in Israeli history, European history, leather was part of the divine structures. So that's where the Brahmin destroyed himself and destroyed the society. By not writing on scrolls, they have destroyed the history, and not allowing others to write, much more they destroyed. So they created untouchables. See, this is a very, very serious question which communists could never understand. How do they deal with it?
Thank you. Our next question, one that is very interesting to me, is now that the farm laws have been repealed, does the relationship between landowning Shudras and landless Dalits go back to being as it was, or has the protest managed to change thinking along caste lines?
Yeah, see, the contradiction between Dalits and Shudras is a contradiction as land ownership by the Shudras and the labor of the Dalits, using their cheap labor. Now, if you look at the history of land in India, Shudras were also not supposed to own land for a long time. As per the Vedic laws or Upanishadic or even Manudharmic laws, Shudras were not supposed to own land, property. Dalits had no way to own it. But there were historical events where the Shudras themselves became kings, and they were given Kshatriya status by Brahmins. And again, a Brahmin would be a prime minister, and a Brahmin would be head priest of the state. But in such states, even in the pre-Mughal period, Shudra kings seem to have opposed Brahmin prime ministers and rulers, granted land ownership to Shudras. Because in entire Indian history, at least as far as my knowledge goes, there were no Dalit rulers. There were Shudra rulers. In the area in which I live in Hyderabad, by 13th century, there was a Shudra king called Shudra kingdom called Kakatiya kingdom. So they gave land rights to Reddys who were Shudras with a title. Or other side of state, the Kammas were given that right. Reddys were given that. So this ownership came to Shudras, but it did not go to Dalits for a long time. And the Brahmins saw to it that the ritual relationships are cut between labor and farming. Though Shudras also involved in agrarian labor, Dalits also involved. But there is this leather problem, there is this beef eating issue they pushed in later years. So the conflict remains now. But my feeling is, once Brahmanism is weakened, with a new vision of Shudra thinkers and the Dalit thinkers together, the contradiction between them and the untouchability issue could be gradually weakened. See, nothing can be abolished at one go. But we must understand the Brahmanic ritualism and its control over these relationships. So I've been trying to write repeatedly that though my Dalit friends, along with their Brahmin associates, many of them, keep on putting the Shudra OBCs in the box as more oppressors and exploiters, or setting aside the Ambedkar understanding of Shudras. They are physical. So for example, the Shudras are the main voters to BJP now, OBCs, but they did not get anything. On the contrary, they got the formulas. Now they are understanding. So, I have found that Shudra scholars are not there in India. At a time when Brahmins were studying in Cambridge and Oxford, in the pre-freedom movement also, no Shudra studied. Even the Shudra kings did not send their children to study. So this lack of modern English education among Shudras is a philosophical backwardness. Once they become philosophical intellectuals, why am I talking about Dalitization of society? Understanding the contradiction. Why Pule talked about Shudras and Atishudras being bringing together and so on. So he was a Shudra, I am a Shudra, but we know what it is. We are concerned about it. So there should be hundreds and hundreds, and we should establish a media of our own. Once the Shudras become independent philosophers of Hindu Brahmanism or the Dvija forces, they can do many things which others did not anticipate earlier.
Okay, thank you for those remarks. The next is a comment followed by a question. The meaning of Varna is not clear in the Vedas. It of course doesn't mean either jati or caste. Srinivas would call the meaning as a fourfold categorization of society mentioned only in the Rig Veda Purusha Sukta. Do you have any other source for Varna as closed and clear-cut division of society from ancient Indian texts other than the Smritis, the Veda, and the Bhagavad Gita?
See, I rejected M.N. Srinivas studies as nonsense. Absolute, pure Brahmanic nonsense. This Sanskritization is a stupid theory. No Shudra is Sanskritizing, and it is studying this theory only. Neither JNU, Brahmin intellectuals, whatever the ideology, Delhi University, or those who are sitting in foreign countries did not understand the farmers' movement and strength. Because Sanskrit is a dead language and nobody would like to learn it. And their cultures are absolutely primitive and superstitious. Who would become vegetarian unless they are fools now? So M.N. Srinivas, you scrap from all academic understanding. I'm not saying remove his books. because that is not my agenda. But the point is, see, it is very clear 4 varnas were some kind of 4 colors and divisions. Brahmins were pure Aryans with a brown color. Kshatriyas were pure Aryans with a brown color. And gradually they got mixed up with the existing 3 other races, Indo-Africans and Indo-non-Aryan Asians. So Tony Joseph has established this very clearly. Before Aryans came, there were 2 migrations out of Africa, Africans and the Asians. They built Indus Valley. So then they constructed mixed color called blue. Vishnu is a blue, and the Vaishyas are also blue. And the Shudras, they treated as the existing native indigenous tribes as the black as Shudra. But gradually, they all became castes. With the production, agrarian economy expanding, and people's specializations are inevitable in any economy. The leather specialized, the pot specialized, the weaving specialized, the killing specialized. They were divided into castes through ritual means. So caste and race are interchangeable. You know, as I said in my autobiography, from a shepherd boy to an intellectual. Race is in ancient India. Race is caste in modern India. That's it. It doesn't need any confusion, and it doesn't need stupid immense universe to teach us Brahmanism there. So you have to study Dalit, Shudra, OBC intellectuals. My request is stop reading Brahmin intellectuals for some time. You will be safe in understanding India. They are absolutely meaningless writers, writing book from book. I call lift irrigation research. They study 10 books and write 11th book, whether they're Oxford educated, Harvard educated. What is that research? They never wrote about what is the Shudra life in history here. And India is not written about country. It is written about only about Brahmins and Banyas and Kayasthas and Khatris. Who is Gandhi? Who is Nehru? Who is Raja Ram Mohan Rai? Who is M.N. Srinivas? Who is D.D. Kosambi? Who is Romelata? They're all Brahman-Bania Kayastha Khatris working in their own interest. And I don't want to be misled through the left jargon in that. I know my foot are in my shepherd life.
I appreciate your very powerful words. And nonetheless, I'll move on to the next question so that we can hear your thoughts on that. So for the first time in Indian history, we see a collective of the Shudra farmers and Dalit laborers being formed. How do you see this combine, and how do you think this unity fits into the Hindutva ideology in particular and democratic traditions in general?
Well, see, Indian democracy and Ambedkar, Phule's thought, and the constitution that we have right now have certainly helped us overcome a major historical blockade by the Brahmanism. And to some extent, the British colonialism giving English for us along with them, though we are very few in number. But now we understand our economy, existence, location, history from one end to another, talk to each other, write in a language that the world can understand. So as the Dalit movement has produced quite a good qualitative intellectuals now, the Shudra OBC movement has not produced. Because these communities have not produced a thinker of Ambedkar stature as of now from their own fold. Neither Periyar nor Sardar Patel or Narayan Guru. Phule was a very bubbling intellectual of pre-constitutional days, so he didn't really give us a full-length philosophy of Shudraism. So this will come now. My feeling is if we work on one single agent, all Indian government schools in all states should adopt English medium as a teaching language. And with one regional language, as I've been arguing for 30 years, and now fortunately one provincial government called Andhra Pradesh has adopted that model. Complete English medium in government schools with one Telugu subject. So if the Shudra, Dalit, Adivasis become English educated all across, along with their native languages, we will produce intellectuals who will really create new theories. No theory is permanently written about by one individual. It's not that. Thinkers are not gods, or not even prophets. Therefore, they will have to produce thought from time to time, age to age. My hope is when I was working on Shudra book, I hardly found any Shudra intellectual to write 10 essays for them. So I had to locate young scholars in the universities here and there and then get them write those essays, and the book has come out. But I hope in future, a lot more will come. And Punjabis themselves, and those who are abroad, please don't put many of your children in engineering, medicine, but educate them in social science, in language and law, and make them thinkers to come back India, like Ambedkar, and write about this country. This country is totally unwritten about. The Shudra life, the Dalit life, the production, the technologies are still unrecorded. So let us do that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those thoughts as well. I believe we have time for one more
Yeah, that's
question.
all. I think I'm also here.
And so the next question that we'll address is, although farm laws have been repealed, do you think that agricultural reforms are needed or not? And will that become a major issue in agrarian economy?
Well, it looks like, the ground reality. Once the farm laws are repealed by the most adamant BJP Hindutva government, and RSS, which was trying to hide its face, which was responsible for bringing this farm laws, to hand over the economy to Bania monopolies. They saw the instability threat for the first time. They never saw any instability threat with Muslim issue, but they saw an instability threat with the farmers' struggle. And now the state governments are coming forward, demanding for minimum farm price, and other issues will come up. The agriculture versus the industrial economy and the caste ownership of that. And this will change the intellectual domain in the universities. I'm hoping that more and more Shudra youth will get into central universities, IITs, and possibly go to foreign universities and study. Definitely it makes a hopeful new path for history. As this book itself said, there is a vision for new path. The former struggle has shown us a definite new path. And how it unfolds is going to be seen in future, and we'll have to wait and see. Thank you all for this great evening.
And thank you so very much for the talk and for your very considered responses to the questions. I would just like to encourage everybody to become much more familiar with Dr. Kancha Ilaiah Shepherd's thoughts and theories. I agree very much with you, Dr. Shepherd, that it is really very important for us to look at newly theorizing things like caste and Indian society and South Asian society based not on a Brahmanical perspective, but one that really credits perspectives of Dalit scholars and theorists. In one response I have to your last remarks is that I think it's imperative for us to find ways to open education up to Shudras and Dalits at the level that you suggest. If it truly is important that education is that profoundly needed, and that much of it is to be based on English language education, then I think that we have a huge challenge and a huge mandate to open the doors much more widely and to start creating Dalit and Shudra scholarship and philosophy from the ground up, beginning with young people. So with those remarks, again, I would like to thank you very much. I would like to thank the audience for the wonderful participation, the great questions. We hope to see you in a few weeks at our next talk. And again, look for the details on the time and the date. And with that, I would like to close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.